Good morning. Good morning, everybody. So it is really a great pleasure to have with us Professor Murgia from the Universidad Autónoma de México, UNAM. Professor Mario is a poet, literary translator, and full professor of English, translation and comparative literature. His interests are thematically varied and have often revolved around the relationship between literature and other artistic expressions such as music and the performing arts. Do you sing or play?
Oh no, I do it very badly. So that's
great that you know music. That's beautiful. His main area of academic research is Anglophone and Hispanophone drama and poetry from the 20th century and the early modern period, with particular emphasis on English and colonial Spanish poetry produced in 16th and 17th centuries. Murgia also specializes in contemporary Anglo-Irish poetry. I know that it is a bit long, what I would say, because his career is incredible, but I think it's so interesting.
Summarize it as much as you
No, not at all, because I think it is extremely interesting, all the fields that Professor Murgia really covers. As a Mexican's only Miltonist, and this is what we are going to see tomorrow in the round table that you are all invited to, he has published annotated Spanish editions of John Milton's Masque, and yes, I do know, and the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates. He has also participated in the first ever Mexican edition of James Joyce's Dubliners. So he covers many Irish writers and very important ones, besides Robert Graves, Poe, Adrienne Rich, very nice poet, I think I like Adrienne a lot, Dylan Thomas, among many others. Murgia's book, Versos Escritos in Agua, La influencia del paraíso perdido in Byron, Keats, and Shelley, is also another important publication and attempts to explain how the figure of Milton's Satan was adapted and sublimated in the poetry of the so-called younger romantics. His volume, singularly remote, Essays on Poetry, covers a wide range of topics from the problem of canon formation to the poetry of the Mexican modernistas and the rhetoric of Geoffrey Hills. I need to know more. His literary essays has been published in Iberoamérica Global, Anuario de Letras Modernas, the Hopkins Quarterly, the Milton Quarterly, as well as in books from Oxford University Press and Wiley Blackwell, to name but a few examples. And the rest I will continue tomorrow, just to create this expectation for tomorrow, because I think that your career is really amazing. Thanks a lot. It's a great honor to have you with us.
The honor is mine. Yeah, well, good morning, is it? Yeah. Good morning. Thank you. As you can see, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. But I'm very happy to be here, very honored to be here, and I hope you will enjoy this as much as I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you, Laura, for having me, and I thank the USB for opening its doors to me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
And you are at the Agman corner.
I am, yes,
this is
exactly.
important.
This is very important.
It's a cultural
yes,
summer.
I found myself in a very Irish corner, which is always nice. I'm missing some Guinness there. So perhaps we can drink a cup after this. Yes, good. Can you drink on campus?
No, we can't. We have to go up.
You're you cannot drink on campus at the National University of Mexico, which I find ridiculous, really, because almost every university in the world, you can actually drink. I mean, you need to toast to events like this, right? I think it's and never mind. Let's not talk about alcohol. Let's talk about Irish poetry. Curiously enough, I would like to quote not an Irish poet, but a Polish poet, a very important one, whom I'm sure you've all heard of, is Wisława Szymborska. And I would like to quote a poem by her, because it is a poem that I think speaks very much not only of the nature of her poetry, but also the nature of poetry in general. And unwillingly, it speaks of the very nature of Irish poetry, which of course tells you about the kind of relationship and the kind of connection that there is between poets, poems, and poetic traditions around the world. The poem's called Map, and the lines go like this. It's a translation, of course, from the Polish. I have no Polish, I must say, so I resorted to someone else's translation. Very good, I suppose. I like maps because they lie, says Szymborska in her poem. I like maps because they lie, because they give no access to the vicious truth, because great-heartedly, good-naturedly, they spread before me a world not of this world. So you can see how important this is, not only for the poem, but also for the development of the lines in itself. And it tells you about the expansive nature of verse in any language, either in, say, both the original language or in translation, which is something that allows us to know these poems, to know the poet, to know the mind of the poet and the mind of the poet as well. Now we'll go from Poland to Mexico for a little bit. I'm sure you know he's quite famous. He used to be quite famous. I'm going to read out a note. And this note by Octavio Paz was published in May 1985 in the pages of a prestigious magazine titled Vuelta. The note has the following title: Deprivation and Fulfillment. Colin W. Yates. Actually, this is the only time that Paz actually wrote about Yates, for some strange reason. It's a very brief note, so I'll read it out in its entirety. This is also translation because the original is, of course, in Spanish. Paz says, there is a substantial body of literature burdened with sociological weight that persists in seeing the city as the gate for alienation, where men undergo the cruelest amputation, that of their own being. It is true that communal life always threatens our identity, but it is also true that the city, with its anonymous crowds, sometimes prompts the encounter with ourselves, and occasionally the revelation of what lies beyond us. The ancients had visions in the deserts and wastelands. We have them in the hallway of a building or on any street corner. The poetry of the city is simultaneously a poetry of the loss of being and a poetry of fulfillment. In a brief poem, Yates describes with simple and mysterious words the sudden transition from deprivation to bliss. And then Paz gives us his own version of the poem by Yates, or a section of the poem by Yates. I'll read it out in Spanish. Impases en Spanish. 50 años cumplidos pasados. Perdido entre el gentío de una tienda de centés solitario a una mesa, un libro abierto sobre el mármol falso, viendo sin ver las ideas y venidas del torrente, las idas y venidas del torrente. De pronto una descarga cayó sobre el cuerpo, gracia rápida, y por 20 minutos fui inundado. Yo, bendito, podía bendecir. The urban landscape in those lines is dual for us. On one hand, it offers the possibility of encounter oneself in its fragmented state, of the poet in this case, with being. That ineffable entity that in English is referred to as self. On the other hand, the urban setting simultaneously presents the possibility, which at times becomes a certainty, of losing oneself and the self in both a physical and spiritual sense amidst a multitude of others or selves who are foreign, yet potentially knowable. Both events, often and especially since the 19th century, are essential themes of poetry. Such possibilities constitute true excursions into the private and the personal domain that begin, however, in the realm of plural anonymity, in the bustling impersonality of an urban multitude in one or several public spaces. The guide for such journeys can be none other than the poet himself, who, with the arrangement of a few verses on the page, maps the terrain of individual consciousness. And this is a map that can only be appreciated when juxtaposed against the experiential background of the metropolitan panorama. In this sense, Pass's intellectual concentration is very much astonishing. In just one set of lines, in a stanza, and from a few verses, the poet defines and delineates a definitive and even fundamental transition in the development of the human psyche. The interesting bit is that there is a very particular relationship between these translated lines and the original word lines in English, not only because, of course, the Spanish has a translation, but also because it is a translation, but only to a very limited extent, in as much as those lines by Pass constitute a version of Pass's own poem, in that sense. Yeats's lines read, "My 50th year had come and gone. I sat, a solitary man, in a crowded London shop, an open book, an empty cup with the marble tabletop. While on the shop, the street I gazed, my mind was suddenly blazed. In 20 minutes more or less it seemed so great a happiness that I was blessed and unblessed." I cannot help but return to the Spanish version that was produced. The Mexican poet, in what can only be seen as an appropriation, or even a rewriting, has dispensed with Yeats's specific references. London is not there. I'm not sure how I can go back. But London is not there. I don't know if you noticed. London is not there. The city has been erased from the poetic map. Details like an empty cup or the very private happiness experienced by the lyrical self of the poem have been replaced in the Spanish by a powerful onslaught of a torrent and the sudden revelation provoked by an equally surprising swift grace. The provinces of the private sphere are in the poem indistinguishable from the public, populous, and plural metropolis. Paz has erased from Yeats's piece the boundaries that separate the poet's intimate epiphany from the perception of those who, outside the poem, can barely distinguish the poet's genius thanks to the figurative possibilities of language. Paz's Yeats thus represents the unlimited cartography of the poet's reflection on individual areas. You might have noticed my reference to Bowman. I'm sure you know, and to whom we will come back. I will come back in a minute. It is almost unnecessary to affirm that Paz, with his brief appropriation of Yeats through poetic commentary and recreative translation, is far from representing the only encounter between Ireland and Mexico in the realm of literature and poetry. I would like to focus on Ireland and Mexico since it's my own realm, talking about realms and literature. Since the early 20th century, some of Mexico's most influential poets were already exploring the character of Irish poetry and drama in their own work, as versifiers and playwrights. I will mention just a few. For example, in 1932, the inaugural season of the Teatro Orientación, the theater of orientation, very loosely translated, featured the staging of, in Spanish, La Boda del Calderero, which is the translation of the title of The Tinker's Wedding, a drama written in 1908 by the Governor John Millington Synge. And this was translated by the great Mexican poet Salvador Novo. Novo would go to translate and stage because he was also a director. What is perhaps Samuel Beckett's most famous work, Waiting for Godot, or as he translated it, Esperando a Godot, for the opening of the La Capilla Theatre in 1955. This was followed by yet another translation, which was Lady Windermere by, of course, Oscar Wilde, and St. John by George Bernard Shaw in 1958 and 1961, respectively. All of this is, of course, dramatic poetry, but poetry nonetheless. And what comes next is very interesting. A seminal anthology of classical Mexican poetry commissioned by UNESCO and compiled by Octavio Paz himself was translated into English in 1950, no less, by Beckett. Although it is said that the Irishman referred to his translation as the worst literary experience of his life, up to that point, 19 of the 103 poems he translated into English were included in the 2014 edition of the Collected Poems of Samuel Beckett Lectures. They were considered Samuel Beckett's, or part of Samuel Beckett's, body of poetry by the anthologists. These pieces were long considered, and I'm quoting here, the most neglected work in the Beckett canon. Samuel Beckett himself, not his drama but his lyrical poetry, would appear again in translation in 2006 in Mexico. This time, the translator was the notable filmmaker and writer Pablo Singh, born in 1974. Interestingly enough, Pablo Singh presents, without translating, almost unintelligible horoscope, spelled hor, W-H-O-R-E, right? Horoscope, which is a long poem by Beckett that, according to Sid, the translator, and I'm quoting, is a text that obstinately resists being rendered into another language, which is why he presents it in English and then he sort of paraphrases it. But aside from the well-known Irish literary figures, from these well-known figures such as Beckett himself, Wilde, Synge, etc., It wasn't until 2003 that other relatively unexplored Irish words in Spanish were mapped and documented through translation in Mexico. In that year, in 2003, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, or now as we know it, published a graft tongue, una lengua injertada, which is an anthology of such works called A Grafted Tongue by the Ibero-American poet John Murgia. This is an unprecedented bilingual anthology of music, conceived by the permanent seminar on literary translation at the School of Philosophy and Lectures or Literature at UNAM. The collection was coordinated by Eva Cruz, and it includes 36 Irish words, from Patrick Kavanagh and Louis McNeese to Glenn Connell and Louis Campbell. The poems featured in the volume were skillfully and intelligently translated by eminent scholars of words, including Naila Naila Ferreira of Brazilian origin, Charles Broad, Flora Horton, Claudia Brody, Marina Fay, Monica Mansu, and Federico Catani. In the brief preface of A Grafted Tongue, the scholar and translator Jose Juan Davila asserts the following, I quote: "The struggle for land, historically owned mostly by the English but worked by poor Irish peasants, made land and landscape important in Ireland. And the landscape of the countryside, or even the urban landscape, appears in much of 20th century. In the same way, motifs rescued from the distant past by some 19th century writers become nostalgia and sadness, expressed in an iconography that in some cases is still relevant. But above all, misuse of identity, the dire consequences of war, and intense imagination are fertile territories for poetry to live in the everyday and delight us with its intensity. In this way, contemporary Irish poetry has become one of the most vital and interesting experiences of our day." Of course, the key terms of this reflection are landscape, iconography, imagination, and territory. These concepts not only take us back to the root of meditation of Yeats and the past of the environment, but they also constitute one of the most significant leitmotifs of contemporary Irish and Mexican verse, a poetic notion of being in the world. I have, of course, emphasized the use of words like cartography, map, and province. This emphasis is by no means gratuitous. Such a focus on certain cartographic imagery is consequently related to the representational possibilities inherent in the poetry of several Irish and Mexican poets. These possibilities articulate a sort of plane of imagination that in turn is expressed in terms of imagery that is as poetic as it is cartographic. The poets place themselves under assumed identities in the measures and allocation of the verses. They present their poems as verbal and imagistic maps, in which being and the world coexists, encounter each other, define each other, and point to each other. Now, having said this, I would like to move on to some of the poems that I sent you a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at them, but if you didn't, it doesn't really matter, because we can read them out right now. For example, there's a poem I would like for us to make a couple of comments, which is a poem by the great Emma Bowman, whom we lost a couple of years ago. How many years ago did she pass away? Yes. 2 or 3 years ago, right? Just let me find it. 2019, yes. Right before the
right before your chair.
yes,
And your chair was.
yes, exactly, and right before lockdown.
Yes.
It's been quite a while. The poem is titled Mise Ere, which means in Irish, I am Ireland. Curiously enough, the title of this poem is taken from an old, very old Irish poem written by P.H. Pierce, in which Ireland speaks as a woman. And this is by no means unheard of. There is a body of poetry which consists of course, Irish poems, in which Ireland is heard speaking, right? And this is almost a poem. Well, I'm not sure who to call it a genre or a subgenre, but it is a very important figure. Ireland becomes a very important political figure and a very important political speaker in that sense. The poem reads in English as follows. It's a very short poem. Let me read it out to you. Mise Ere. I won't go back to it. My nation is placed into old dactyls, oaths made by the end tallows of the candle. Land of the Gulf Stream, the small farm, the sculpted memory, the songs that bandage up the history, the words that make a rhythm of the crime where time is past. A palsy of regrets. No, I won't go back. My roots are brutal. I am the woman. As Lebanon's mix of silk at the wrists, the sort of dove strut to the precincts of the garrison. If I could only decline her, lost now out of context, stray figure of speech, from this rainy street again to the roots, she might teach me a new language, to be a symbol able to sing the past in pure syllables, limning hymns sung to belly beat, or a woman, able to speak at last my mother's tongue, able to speak at last my mother's tongue. Where does that from the line? Well, it is very evident how Ireland speaks, not only as a woman, but also as a poet. The poem deals with evidently a geography of Ireland that is created or recreated through language, and therefore language becomes an important issue that the poem deals with, but also an important political topic that the voice in the poem, of course, presents, and notice analyzes, as though it were not only language in itself, but also poetry. So notice how Ireland becomes poetry, becomes life, becomes verse, at the same time that Ireland becomes a speaking woman. That is to say, a poetess. I know that the term poetess is a very derided term these days, but I think it should not be seen that way or considered that way, because, for example, in poems like this, right, the figure of the poetess becomes a figure of dignity, if you will, not only of national dignity, but also of political dignity. Notice how in the poem, past and present become one, right? Just like past and present become one in Ireland, and not only there, but also in the vision of Ireland that the Irish present to the world, and in this case, to the reader, right? Or to different readers. This poem and its translation into Spanish are taken from that particular mythology I was talking about a few minutes ago, right? And the poem was translated by the professor who actually put together the anthology by Eva Cruz. And it's interesting because she manages to capture in Spanish. If you have the time to read it, it's very easy to read. Most of you speak Portuguese, it becomes very, very simple. But there is this simplicity against a complexity that takes us back to these propositions and this idea around that the original word in English actually projects. Eva Cruz was sensitive enough to translate the last line not as my mother tongue, as some of people would have translated it, I'm sure, but la lengua de mi madre, which is my mother's tongue, which is entirely different from my mother tongue. Sometimes your mother's tongue is not necessarily your mother tongue. I'm sure more than one of us know about that. Then I would like to move on to another great Irish poet whose name is Eileen Hulan. Slightly younger, I think, than Amber. She's still with us, and she's very peculiar as a poet. Not only because of the originality of her verse, but also because of the reasons that she writes poetry, and because of the language in which she writes the poetry, which is Irish. Not that it is uncommon for Irish poets to write in Irish, but she does it systematically. She speaks English, of course, but she does not write poetry in English. And neither does she translate her own Irish poetry into English. That is something that other poets, famous poets, have actually done for her. For example, James Heaney used to translate her poetry. He was one of her most devoted translators. And this poem, which is taking a couple of minutes to find it, is called Man Watching. Let's see. So the poem is titled Man Watching. The sound of everything falling into sleep, a sense of being nowhere at all, set him on his way, traffic far enough, wind, tall trees, to a back gate, a dark yard. A path goes past the bins, the kitchen door, switches to the gap wall by the windows lit softly above the privet edge. He stops and watches. He needs to see this. A woman working late in the refectory, a soaring curtain, the lines of her face dropping to fatigue, severity, age, the hair falling out of it, a wit collapse at her core. The hands are raised to threaten. The tongue moves in hungry lips. He cannot see the feet or shoes. They are trapped in toils, cloth. He is comforted. He can move on while the man comes out with long rushing sounds into quiet, onto the scene. The white cafes, trombone music of poached tables. He will watch the faces behind the bar, tired girls, their muscles bracing, breakers music, and will wait, balance Once again, this is very much an urban vision, right? A vision not of the beautiful woman, as would be the case in, say, commonplace verse, but a vision of a working woman, right? A woman of the working class, right? That somehow, in her toil, inspires a sense of calm, right? And silence in the man that is watching her, or she's unaware, right, of the man watching her. But it is the experience of the man watching the woman, right, that comes through in the poem as almost revelation, right? As would, for example, in James Joyce's works, would be called an epiphany, right? But this is an epiphany not of the transcendental, right? But an epiphany of the individual, of the person, right? Of the peace and mindfulness, right, that comes about by or through paying attention to an ordinary woman doing ordinary things, right, in a very ordinary kind of life, if you will. And this reminds us of precisely the beauty, almost the aesthetics and the poetry that lies very much in that ordinariness that becomes apart. This is some kind of an individual map, right, of the personal and of personal thought turned into poetry. Now I would like to talk very briefly about more contemporary poets, young poets, Irish poets of a young generation. Like, for example, the great Paula Meehan, right, whom I'm sure you've heard of. She is one of the most important contemporary poets. And if you allow me, I will read out a poem by her called Believing. If I can find it first. Let's see. Here it is. Believing. He had fallen so far down into himself, I couldn't reach him. Though I had arranged our escape, he wouldn't budge. He sat days in his room checking manuscripts, referencing photos of his family, strictly knew what they were taken. I begged him, hurry, for the moonless nights were due. It was 2 nights' walk through the forest. The soldiers had recently entered our quarter. I dreaded each knock on the door, their heavy boots on the stairs. Our friends advised haste. Many neighbors were already in prison. His eyes were twin suns burning. Silence was his answer to my pleas. I packed a change of clothes, half the remaining weight rations. My month's gold forgot. The documents at a glance were past. It wasn't for myself I went, but for the new life I carried. At the frontier I recruited. That last morning by the window watching the sun struck the lamp on the street, mirroring the clouds of rain. He wore the black shirt I embroidered with stars and said nothing. Nothing. Then the guide pushed me forward. Between one sweep of the flashlight and the next, I slipped into an unstepped, grateful under the cover sense of urgency here, right? A sense of impending peril of menace. But somehow it is both diluted and at some point in the poem enhanced, not by words, but by silence that can be perceived from the other figure, the figure of the man who does not speak but remains silent. While danger is looming, right? And chasing after not only the man himself but also the speaker. Notice how the boundaries of, say, Irish reality have been crossed, if you will. They have been overflown by the possibilities of this poem, by the imaginative possibilities of this poem, which are great, since this sense of urgency, this sense of danger, can be felt and perceived through the words of the speaker, which at the same time clash, if you will, against not only the silence of her interlocutor, if you will, but also with this peril that surrounds them and that can only be heard, right, or detected through senses like the sense of hearing. The boots can be heard, but not necessarily seen. So notice how the geography changes here, right? It moves from Ireland to this imagined state of danger, which inevitably recalls certain scenes from history of the 20th century, which is a history that should not and must not be repeated, right? And of which this man is a reminder. And finally, let me talk about a read a poem by Murgia who was born in 1956, so she's very young. I must say that Murgia wrote a poem for an anthology. I managed to put together an anthology of essays on Irish poetry, which is called La Caverna, which is the language, and which, by the way, you can download for free if you're interested. I can tell you where if you need a few minutes. But she wrote this poem especially for us, for that anthology. That is not the poem I'm going to read out today. You have to read it yourself and tell me what you think about it. Yes, and of the rest of the book, evidently. But this is an old poem. Once again, a very short poem that I think is worth reading. It's titled Voted Land. The Pope and the Sacred Heart went off on the back of the cart, and out tried to find a home for the child of Prague. If that land weren't the exact shape of a granite glass, there might be some chance that I'd part with it. Small chance that if I'd been brought up in the clear light of reason, I might feel different. But I often come home in the dark, and from the corridor, in the red glow, I can discern a child's violin, and coming closer, a clock. A photograph of a dead friend, hazelnuts gathered from the well, and 3 leather-skinned shamans who flew all the way from Asia. I designed none of this, and don't know whether sacred objects and images tended to cluster around a constant light, or whether, as most of the small stars constancy, through our lives and other nights, now confers some sanctity of my life's bric-a-brac. This poem is also interesting because it also breaks boundaries. It expands into other geographies and cartographies, not only of the real world, but as I said, it was originally written in Irish and then translated both into English and into Spanish, which entails a kind of journey that should be discussed and of course taken into consideration when we read these poems, not only to ourselves but to other people. But notice this particular poem by Cameron Virgin Lamb tells you of a journey, right? A journey that is not only a geographical, but also an imaginative journey. A journey in which a very intimate scene is not only reproduced, but also presented through very mild descriptions. Right? And these descriptions are not necessarily of the environment, which is a close to environment, but they are descriptions of a mental state, right? A state of mind that Murgia manages to put forth, right? Very eloquently and very evocatively in very, very short lines, which is one of the great strengths of the poem. For example, lines like in the rain flow, which is one single line, I discern the child's violin and coming closer, closer. It is the outside that comes in, right, and explode in this imagery that is very, very condensed, right, in one brief poem that once again becomes very expansive in its relationship with the mind of the world, right? And with the mind of the possible figure, right? The abstract figure, almost abstract figure that, of course, sees all these things. Right? And I think these poems are tangible proof of how those extra possibilities of poetry can be limitless. And how these poems actually manage to create some kind of cartography, some kind of map, right, of the Irish world of mind, even though these poems are at very different times, right, in very, very different epochs, if you will. And not only that, but these are poems that evoke different areas, not only of the world, but also of Ireland and of the minds of these Irish poets. And notice how most of these poets are women, right? Because contemporary Irish poetry is very much, if you will, a movement of the females, if you will, a movement of women, right? Who first and foremost are poets, right? Even though sometimes they consider themselves to be people of very critical minds, but first and foremost, they are poets, right? They are very much aware of the tradition they belong and the manners in which they deal with that tradition, and the manners in which they go beyond that tradition, and how it perhaps, in that sense, become limitless, as they can be read, enjoyed, discussed, and thought about by audiences as diverse as Brazilian audiences, Portuguese audiences, audiences from parts of the world, not only in their original languages, but also in translation, which is something that we should do well often and in more depth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Cartography, we would say, of contemporary Irish poetry. And I would say that you started with all this vision of the burden of history in the poets, and then coming to the different states of mind, and then imagination. Could you say that nowadays the new cartography that these young poets are introducing us to a new island, a new kind of island, is more of hope, or still with this menace and danger, as you put here in Monica?
Yes, I think that one of the great strengths of contemporary Irish poetry is that it is able to be as much Irish as it is, well, international and multifaceted. The topics of contemporary Irish poetry are very varied, right? And of course, there is the sense of danger in some poems, but also a sense of, say, comfort, being Irish, and comfort in the new possibilities, of a poet finding comfort in the possibilities, in the new possibilities of Irish verse, which is present, for example, also in the poetry of poets like Murgia, but also of even younger poets, poets who come from not only the Republic of Ireland, but also from Northern Ireland, which is a place that is also bustling with poetry and with literature in general, and which communicates greatly not only with the poetry and the tradition of the Republic, but also with other poetries and other traditions from different parts of the world.
Any questions? Like or
Comments?
So, yeah, thank you very much for your lecture. It was very enlightening. And when you were talking, I was thinking about I don't know if it is a silly question about the political implications of translation, especially in the Spanish language from Mexico rather than Spain. So I was wondering if you could comment about this political implication to translate an Irish poet by Mexican translator rather than Spanish translators. And
Yes. Yes. I'm not really sure how this works in the Lusophone world, but in Spanish-speaking world for decades, for most of the 20th century, most of the translations of important works of literature or important authors were undertaken by Ibero-Spanish translators, that is to say, translators from Spain, who built their names as translators, precisely doing that, translating the classics, if you will, works of literature, authors into Spanish. And those works of translation were distributed, of course, not only in Spain, but also in the rest of the Spanish-speaking world. It is only until fairly recently that translators from Mexico and the rest of Spanish-speaking have taken on a kind of duty, if you will, to translate not only for countries, but also for the rest of them, all the difficulties that entails, right? Since we speak very different kinds of Spanish, for example, in Mexico, or in Argentina, if you will, or Venezuela, etc., right? Which, even though they're mutually, say, understandable, they have certain peculiarities that I think need to be addressed and underlined in every single translation. And that in itself, I would say, is or should be a political statement. For example, the other day I came across this review of a book I translated. It is an anthology of modern, contemporary Scottish short stories that I've translated that. And I translated about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. And I never saw a review of that the other day. I bumped into it. And of course, most of the review was about the book in itself, right? And the short stories themselves. And it was only towards the end of the review that the reviewer mentioned, well, he didn't mention me, he mentioned the translation. He didn't mention it by name or anything like that, but he said about the translation that it was, the Spanish was desmerece. It is unworthy, or something like that, because it's filled with Mexicanisms that replace, the everyday talk of people in certain parts of Scotland. And actually, that didn't bother me at all. Actually, I found that very encouraging. I found that very encouraging because, for me, as, for example, Mexican translating not only in Mexico, but for Mexico, for for a Mexican audience, right? That is, I think, what I should do. And the fact that I was being criticized for that means that I was somehow successful in doing that. So it didn't discourage me with quite frankly. I mean, there is no way. There is no way to do such a thing. Because when you come to think about it, there is no such thing, for example, as neutral French, right? Or there's no such thing as neutral Portuguese, actually. Right? There is no way to do that without actually betraying your own linguistic and cultural origin, right? How am I supposed to translate, for example, I'm not mentioning the word, but how am I supposed to translate curses, right? Bad words, right? Nobody can do that neutrally, right? Can they, right? A neutral word is not an insult, right? And you need to insult, you need to insult it, right? Otherwise, well, the word goes to waste, the expression goes to waste, and you're neutral, right? That's not what you want to do, you want to offend somebody, right? For the character wants to offend another character. That's exactly what you should preserve, I suppose. And you can only do that in your own language, if you will.
And depending on the culture, sometimes these bad words are not bad words, they are
exactly.
personality, the way they use it.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yes. And because most of those short stories were very violent. I mean, if you get to read them either in English or in Spanish or hopefully in Portuguese, you will see that most of those stories are very violent. Right? So the language is violent. And you can only be violent in your own language. Right? I mean, linguistically, you can only be violent in your own language. So there is no other way to translate it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and there is a whole kind of argument in relation to different translations into Spanish, especially coming from Latin.
How does that work in Portuguese?
Well, in Portuguese, I think that there is a Portuguese from Portugal, Portuguese from Brazil. And so I do not know. I think that tomorrow the translators will tell us if there is the same kind of fight as we have. For example, I know in Argentina, for example, they get crazy because all the rights to translate into Spanish or are from Spain or from Mexico. Because it's more Spanish language rather than the Argentinian language. So I know that.
That's interesting because in Mexico we're very jealous of the Argentine translators because we think exactly the same about you. That you translate everything and you leave us just very little to translate.
That's right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Very small moment, very much encouraging.
Thank you. Obrigado.